I have a number of Hive bodies in my garage, and I'm preparing for spring right now. I just painted, I brought all my stuff inside. I've been waiting for a warm day and we haven't had any. So I brought it all in my basement and I've painted my boxes. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm playing the frame game. And what I mean by that is I have 160 frames, I think, at my disposal in my garage. Not the stuff that's deployed, but the spare boxes. These are Honey Supers, Nuke boxes, things like that. And they're all mismatched, which drove me to build this presentation. So Langstroth Hive dimensions don't change. They've been the same for a long time. A shallow is 19-inch frame by 5 3/4 or 5 3/8. A medium is 19 inches by 6 1/4, and the deep frame is 19 by 9 1/8. Now, these are the frames, not the boxes, sometimes change dimensionally by manufacturer. So I want you to be aware of that. They're not all created equal. Now, the ones we have sitting on the tables around here tonight probably all came from the same manufacturer. The sidebar is probably the same length and so on. But go home and look if you have mismatched equipment, and you will find that the bars, just in the construction of the frame, differ. The ear size, and when I mean ear, I'm talking about this piece right here. That's a flat 1/2 inch. There's flat 3/8 inch. There's tapered 3/8. There's tapered 1/2 inch. This becomes important for you if you're buying equipment, or you win a Hive, or somebody gives you a Hive and you start getting mismatched equipment, right? But you need to understand that the standards are 3/8 and 1/2 inch. The other thing to consider is that tapered thing sits in there differently based on the taper. If it's flat, it's going to be up a little higher. If it's tapered, it'll rest on that taper. Why do they taper them? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Easy to take out. Why? Because they don't get glued. There's less surface area. Flat one sits right on the propolis and sticks, and you got to pry them off. Taper one goes this way. It also centers the frame. Theoretically, you have 2 tapers centered. Hopefully it'll center in when you rest it in. But they vary. This dimension here varies. 5/8 or 3/4 of an inch is the standard. And if you build your own equipment, or you buy stuff that doesn't have quality control, even the depth of the channel that it rests on differs. And what does that do? It changes the gap. If you're using 3/8 inch ear and 1/2 inch ear, it changes the way the frames sit inside the boxes. You don't see it, you don't realize it, because you're just putting boxes on. But there's an impact. And mixing different frame rest tabs, different frame rest sides, different manufacturer equipment causes problems. The gaps change. Big, small. Ouch. Or, hey, I need a little help here. I can't reach the frame. What's the byproduct of these two problems? This. Right here, what this is burr comb. On top of a frame, that gap was too big. The bee saw an opportunity to build comb. Somebody pulled the frame above it off, and what do you have? You have all this ripped up comb. Sorry, my bad. You have all this ripped up comb, you have exposed larvae. How many have seen that? Yeah. Byproduct of frames mismatched and things going on. The other side that you see, there's a bee that's ripped apart. Covering's ripped off because something's there. Queens in danger. Your queens are built sometimes off the bottom of the frame. You go to tilt the frame up to see if there's any queen cells. They're requeening, and you rip that queen frame, that queen cell apart. Now your hive is going to go queenless because of this problem. Queens in danger, bridge comb, damaged bees, the propolis issues. The other side of this is if it's too close together, they propolis it. Have you ever tried to pull a frame out and you're like, it won't come because it's glued to the one below it. So the frame space, because of these fluctuations, become difficult, especially if you're mixing and matching manufacturer frames. This is another one. You have these frame rest protectors. Probably how many of you have the 90-degree metal strips? Raise your hand. A lot of you. How many of you have ever seen this one? A couple of you. These were prevalent for a period of time and they still sell them. What's the premise of this little hump that it has?
Less surface area.
Less surface area, same idea, right? But when you put that in, it's raising the frame up. Now what happens is the top bar is either shoved underneath the top bar of the frame above it, or it's up close underneath the top cover, or the bottom bar is raised up from the top bar underneath it, or it's down. All of these things make a mess of things. Now, when you play the frame game, part of your challenge is you should be rotating your comb out, and you should be replacing your foundation. I'm in this struggle right now. I have every variation up here. I have slotted tops, groove tops, wedge top. We have wedge tops here tonight, Charlie?
Excuse me?
You have the wedges where you tack the nail on to hold the foundation in?
No.
No, okay. Does anybody not understand what a wedge top looks like? Actually, this is a wedge top right here. Oh no, it's not, it's a groove. A wedge top has a thin piece of wood that you tack on, and the foundation has wires that come up, and at the top of the foundation the wire comes out and it protrudes at a 90-degree angle. You tuck it into the frame against it, and then you tack a piece of board in and it holds the wire, and that's what keeps the frame inside. I have a picture of it.
All right.
I'll show you.
We do have.
You do? Okay, good. I just want everybody to see these tonight before you leave. So this is the bottom of it. That's the top, slot, groove, wedge, there's other kinds. The bottom, slot, groove. This is a different kind of slot. See, this one has the slot all the way through. This one has a different engineering in the way that it's constructed. That's a solid bottom board. Solid bottom frame on the thing. So why does this matter to you? You're going to replace your comb. I'm going to skip ahead. Foundation. When you have your frames and you have to replace the foundation, this is an example out of the Kelly catalog. They have all these types. A wedge bar on the top with a divided bottom. Their instruction is 8.5-inch foundation with hooks. The hook thing that I was talking about. A slotted top bar with a groove bottom. Use 8 7/8 foundation with no hooks. A wedge bar with a solid bottom. Use 8 1/8 foundation with hooks. This doesn't go down into anything, it just sits there. A wedge groove bottom, 8 7/16 foundation with hook. Your homework is required. And if you don't know where you bought your frames and have records of this is a Kelly frame, this is a Brushy Mountain frame, this is a Daydown frame, you're literally going to have to get a tape measure out and measure them. Because the worst thing to happen is to buy yourself foundation, put it in, tack it in, and the foundation goes like this because it's too big. And then you have to take it out and trim it, and you're trying to cut and it rips and it tears and it becomes a problem. And you play the frame game. So we talked about the different variations. Now, when you're putting a frame together, you want it to last when you put it in the extractor. And you're spinning that thing for all it's worth to get every ounce of honey out of it, and that frame is getting all the pressure, or you're prying on it with your Hive tool, or you drop your box and your frames fall out and all that. You want your frames to be sturdy, so you have to nail. You nail 2 in the top, both sides. This side nail is the most important one, because the 2 in the top are a promissory note that that frame is going to stay together, but it's that side nail that locks it in. Think about what happens if you don't put that side nail in and you pry from the top. You're just prying those nails out. It's not very hard. It's no different than doing a pry. And every time you go in with your Hive tool and you do that pry action, it's just like using a hammer claw and pulling out a nail. Without that side nail, this nail right here, your frames are going to fall apart. Don't cheat. Use all your nails. And then you should subsequently put 2 nails in the bottom too to hold it in underneath. Nail and glue. Another reason not to cheat. Glue that side, glue that side, glue the bottom, glue the bottom. Use 2 nails down here, 2 here, 2 there, 2 there. This is the side nail. This is the cleat, what it looks like. So see these wires, I'm standing in some of your ways. And then follow that up. See that little angled thing right there? Can everybody see that? I know it's difficult, probably an eye chart. That's the wire that sticks out of the top of the frame. And what you do is you slide that right up against that edge and you put this cleat in and you nail it and it holds that wire and it keeps the foundation set in the frame. So don't scrimp when you're building your frames. I have frames that have lasted forever because you take the time and put all the nails in them. Foundation. 4.9 millimeter cell size versus 5.6 millimeter. It's 0.084 thick generally. Manufacturers vary. Small cell versus regular cell, 0.56. There's this theory in beekeeping that bigger bees are stronger and can fly farther and therefore do more work and forage their broods. So there was a period in time when instead of going with what was the natural size, 4.9 or maybe just a little bit bigger than that, they made foundation with bigger holes, bigger cell sizes, because they were trying to breed bigger bees. This philosophy kind of backfired when they made the bees big enough and the spiracle, which is the air vent in the side of the body of the bee, became so big that a trachea mite could crawl inside. And so the spiracles were loaded with trachea mites. So somebody said, you know, if you go back to the 1800s and you look at the way the bees were, the cell sizes were smaller. The other thing was, in a smaller cell, how many foundation or how many varroa can get inside? Not as many as if the cell is bigger. So there was theory, a long-running thing in probably 4 or 5 years ago, saying small cell was the answer. Everybody was trying to move to small cell. So vendors offered both. They offered big and small cell. Most of them, if you don't say anything, they're going to give you the 5.6 millimeter size. The studies came back and said small cell doesn't have an impact on varroa. But there are still people like D. Lusby and others out there that tell you that if you go foundationless, the bees will eventually go to a smaller size, and it's to your benefit. They're better bees. Ask 10 people questions, you'll get 10 different answers. Okay? Question?
A little input on that. If you have older foundation, when it starts to get black, the cell size is going to get smaller and smaller because
Yep.
the pupa cases get left behind. And so it's a natural shrinking of
Yes.
the
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll repeat that so the video has it, but they grow and they leave, when they leave those pupa cases in there, it just keeps stacking up like a cone inside. And when you go and take a really old foundation and you melt it and take the wax out, you're left behind with all those little tubes. That's what that is. That's a great point. And the longer you leave, the smaller those bees get, because they naturally grow to whatever size the cell is. So they also make a thinner 0.057 foundation. It's not meant for spinning out it's meant so you could cut it out to make comb honey. So you cut a block of comb and you put it in a thing and you pour honey on it and you sell it that way. Cut comb is what it's referred to. So if your objective is to do cut comb honey, make sure you buy the right foundation. I'm not going to give any recommendation on cell size, and I honestly have not heard anybody come to me and say, you're a fool for using this one versus that one. So, what about foundationless? So all these frame things aside, I want to make sure everybody keeps in mind that you could do something like this guy right here. It's just a top bar with a groove hanging down. Some people just use a grooved top bar that has a slit in it, and they put a popsicle stick sideways. They glue it in there, and they cover it with a little wax, and the bees just build foundation down. The bees will build comb in here, but the recommendation is, when you're doing these, put 2 drawn out frames next to them inside the box, and this will help them not build wonky comb. Because your box has to be straight, level to the earth, because they build, if it's this way, they're going to build straight down from whatever your box is angled, right? So you want your boxes straight. They can tilt front to back, but they can't tilt side to side. And then the guidance is, if you want foundationless, put 2 frames together with them. So there is plastic foundation. Usually it comes in white and black. Some people like white so they can see things, but then you can't see the eggs. Some people like black. I've not had luck with plastic foundation, but there are some people that say you put plastic foundation in during the springtime when the nectar flow is on, and they'll build that faster than wax. One thing universally that I've heard, I didn't say practice, is that if you put both in there, they'll build one or the other. I will tell you my personal experiences. I've received comb from nukes that I bought that has plastic foundation and it's built out great, but a lot of the stuff that I have, they never build it out. They never build a straight face out. I don't know why. If you're going to put plastic foundation in your hives, make sure it starts in the center, because they don't do a great job building the outside, and you're playing roulette. The other thing that people tell you is put an additional coat of wax on it, and the bees will build it out. It was said last week with Lincoln Senate that they order this stuff with more wax on it. The green ones are for drone brood. The other thing is you could buy something called right cell, which is plastic and it has really thick embossed stuff on it. Last type of frame is a drone brood frame. People not familiar with it, this is how it works. You put it in your hive and they build drone brood in this space. And then once they get it capped, 9 out of 10, according to Eric Musson, 9 out of 10 drone brood cells have the varroa in it. So if you cull the drone, you're taking your varroa load out of your hive. But, you know, as we've said before, we've covered this many times at different meetings, don't breed drones that have mites in them and forget and leave the thing in there and you're making a mite factory, okay? But that's the premise. You put an exchange, and we could go back over these again during the summertime when it comes through, but you put one of these in your hive in a certain position, they will build a honeycomb up top and drone down here, and then once it gets past this, they build it out and you do drone culling to get rid of varroa. Recommendations. Stay with one equipment manufacturer. If it's not too late, you bought brushy stuff, you bought data stuff, you bought somebody's equipment, stay with it. Try and always stay with it. That way, and order the same thing. Don't scrimp on the nails, like I said. Glue, nail, especially that side nail. Sometimes this wood is kiln dried, so it doesn't warp and twist, and it becomes brittle when you put a nail in it. Wet it, or wet the nail, and it'll help the wood expand a little bit, and that sharp point, you could also dull the point on the nail, and it'll try to hopefully prevent it from splitting. Use glue every time. Wire your frames or use pins, so I skipped that part. There's different types. I put 2 on here. There's this kind, and they go in and they just slot over the foundation and they keep the center of the foundation from flopping out. If you put it in without these and you push on the center of the foundation, it does this and it comes out of the groove or slot and then it falls off. Put your pins in. If you're cheap or don't, have somebody that has access, you could use bobby pins. They work perfectly fine. Some people go as far as literally running wires all the way across through those holes. If you're going to do that, they recommend that you use these metal eyelets to prevent the things from being cut, but I don't know who does that these days anymore. They do sell them that way too. Okay, last piece of advice. Consider a frame jig. You're going to see them. Always put the frame rest protectors on your Hive. Always, because when you're in there trying to dig the frame up or cleaning the propolis out, you're digging in your woodenware. Eventually the box is going to get ruined. It's far easier to replace frames than boxes. And how many have foundation right now or putting together Hives? Anybody? Is it in the garage, in the house? Is it warm? I'll ask you. Where do you have it?
Foundation are right now in the garage.
In the garage. I have mine in my garage, and my garage isn't heated. And I took some out and I put it in a frame, and it just crumbles this time of year. If it's cold, you have to warm it up. You have to bring it in the house. And this is another thing. Going back to the questions from before. If you're putting stuff on your Hives right now, feeders, boards, whatever, bring them in your house, get them room temperature before you put them on the Hive. Don't put them on cold. Any questions about the frame game? Anybody in the same position I am with all these frames that are mismatched? And I got a couple. Okay. So hopefully, you know, one of the things you do before you deploy, before you take your box out and put it on, if you have mismatched equipment, lift it up and look where the bottom of the frames are. Hopefully you're going to have a gap, proper gap, and maintain the B space. If you're not, you're having problems. And I have frames that have come from the same manufacturer. Some of them are even with the bottom of the box. I don't know how that happens. You really have to cull that stuff. You're going to be in trouble. And when somebody tries to offer you a frame, do one of two things. Take a marker and write on top of it. I did this week. Every single one of my frames has 1/2 inch or 3/8 inch ear on top of it written with a Sharpie. And I literally made a code. W-S means wedge on the top, slot on the bottom. And if you look at my spreadsheet that I have literally every type. Wedge, slot is the most prevalent. And I'm thinking about taking the anomalies. I have onesie twosies and getting rid of them. I even joked maybe we should have a frame swap and we could all bring our bastard frames and say, oh, I like those, you know. So
We could do a clinic and let people measure them.
Yeah.
And actually see if they know how to differentiate.
It's a neat thing to just go home and measure your stuff. Just take 5 minutes, get a tape measure, measure your frames, and see what kind of stuff you have. And see if it all matches. It's interesting. Yes? A frame rest protector, sure. I showed a picture of a type here. I'm glad you asked. And that's a frame rest protector. So they give you, when you buy a Hive, the ear of the frame. We'll talk about this, but this is a top bar of a frame. This is a side bar, and then there's a bottom bar that goes underneath it, connects to the second. This is the ear. This one happens to be a 1/2 inch wedge with an angled top. That's what this one is. And this is a wedge type. It's got this little plastic thing, or little wooden dowel that you break off. Okay, so I can actually show it to you what it looks like. I don't want to break it. You should do this with a tool. This thing sets in a groove in the box. You could set it, the box comes wood. What they recommend is that channel that all these ride on, have a metal 90-degree strip that you put on there and you tack in with nails. And as this rides back and forth, it's on that metal strip. And when you get your Hive tool and you go in to pry this first frame up, you're against that edge and you're using it as leverage to pry that ear up. That metal frame rest looks like this kind that has a hump, or it just comes up and it goes straight back. And the frame literally sits in here. So it looks like, I have a picture. Somewhere. Wrong direction. It looks like this, but there's a metal piece, a 90 degree, that sits on that edge. Does that answer your question? You do, yes. You always put them in your hives. Doesn't matter what kind of frame, you should always have your frame rests to protect your woodenware. A lot of people say, what's this thing for? They don't understand when they begin, and there's no instruction to tell you to nail these things in. Some people figure them out, some people don't, right? But you should really always put your frame rests in. Any other questions? Okay, good. Let's build some frames. Thank you. You'll remember this one day when you have 9 million frames, trust me. You will.